A super electromagnetic cannon powerful enough to level a building had no effect on it. It instantly absorbed all the machine gun bullets and swelled at a visible rate. Now, even the dry desert beneath our feet had turned into a stinking, slimy swamp, and everyone's boots were stuck fast, unable to move. The command center had coldly issued a second bombardment order. As the countdown hit 5 seconds over the walkie-talkie, my right calf was wrapped in a grayish-white mass. It had grown out of the sand and was creeping up my leg. That wet, wrinkled thing, I couldn't tell if it was rotting flesh or mud, had something moving inside it. I could feel it, densely packed, like countless tiny bone fragments grinding against each other. Then, something started burrowing into the skin of my calf, like 1,000 venomous needles piercing straight into the marrow, a searing pain that cut to the bone. I looked down. The mass had crawled up to just below my knee. With a chilling, muffled crunch, my shin bone was under horrifying pressure. Then I glanced to the lower right and saw a hand resting on my knee. It had emerged from that mass on the ground, grayish-white, 6 fingers, each bent backward, all the joints wrong. It pressed against my knee, and where the nails should be were bony suction cups, pulsing in and out. The walkie-talkie kept counting down, its voice eerily calm. Second shot, 10 seconds to impact. Target, center of the dune. I couldn't feel my foot anymore. Below the knee, it was all that sensation of being stabbed, torn, and then forced inward by something. The mass was still climbing, now above my kneecap. The skin on my thigh tightened, then went numb. That 6-fingered hand was still there. It shifted, moving to the side of my knee, its fingers sinking into the fabric of my pants, leaving small indentations. I could see my own leg getting shorter, being pulled bit by bit into that mass. My leg was becoming its leg. 10 hours ago, we were at the Sandman test range, waiting to watch the bombardment. It was a godforsaken weapons testing ground, nothing for miles but sand and concrete targets. Our Ghost Platoon's mission sounded simple: stay in the bunker, monitor the observation gear, and record how the electromagnetic railgun shredded the targets. That was the 3rd-generation railgun, powerful enough to level a building. We thought we were safe miles away. When we set up the sensors, the ground felt wrong underfoot. It was hard as a scab, cracking with a sound like stepping on dried insect shells. A soldier named Lewis dug with a shovel and said the sand felt like cement mixed with glue. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just compacted sand. When the first round fired, I watched the impact point through the optics. Then I saw it. Even now, thinking about it makes my leg ache. The dune behind the impact point bulged, like a cow-sized toad underground had exhaled. As the dust rose, it spread oddly, mixed with white and yellow powder that looked like dried snot ground into dust. Medic Miller stood beside me, staring at his feet, saying they felt numb, like something was vibrating. I felt it too, a slow, heavy thumping coming up from the ground, thud, 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 like a heartbeat deep underground. Miller checked with his gear and said it was infrasound, but he couldn't find the source. We reported it. Command responded quickly, saying it might be a buried structure collapsing from the shockwave, causing resonance. The whole platoon tried to convince ourselves it was just resonance. Then the platoon leader said since there was a collapse, we needed to get closer and move the seismometer forward to record detailed data. Miller and I were paired up. Between the 2 shots, we drove an all-terrain vehicle 200 meters forward. We were still far from the impact point when we saw a pit in the ground, 3 meters in diameter, perfectly round, as if drawn with a compass. The edges were smooth, the sand melted into a black, shiny substance covered in pinhole-sized pores. As I crouched to look, all sound vanished. The wind stopped. The distant engine idle stopped. The walkie-talkie's wet crackle sounded like someone licking the microphone. Miller pulled out his bayonet, intending to poke at that glossy black shell. The moment the tip touched it, a layer of frost instantly formed on the surface, creeping up the blade so fast he couldn't let go in time. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the entire blade became as brittle as chalk, snapping with a crack and shattering into pieces on the ground. Miller threw the handle away in fright. His fingertips weren't bleeding, but the skin looked like a mummy that had weathered for 3 months. instantly cracking down to the flesh. I told him not to move and called for a retreat over the comms. But the moment I said, "Retreat," the heartbeat-like sound beneath our feet suddenly stopped. The surroundings grew even quieter. Then I heard something shifting in the pit behind me, a wet, heavy sound of a large mass of flesh turning over on the ground. I turned around and saw that black shell at the bottom of the pit, with a bulge rising in the center, flipping upward like an eyelid. When that bulge flipped open, I was directly facing it, less than 5 meters away. It opened slowly, like a person just waking up and prying their eyelids apart. The glassy black shell split down the middle with a crack, and what squeezed out was grayish-white, wet, and covered in eerie veins. Then the entire pit floor lifted, carrying sand, gravel, and fragments of the black shell, surging up from the ground. I heard Miller curse behind me, his voice twisted. When the thing fully emerged, I saw its entire body, a monster of grayish-white, unidentified biological tissue mixed with black sand. It had no head or face, but its massive form writhed violently. Its surface was covered in bundles of fascia, twisting and intertwining, bulging and deflating. Beneath it, tubes of various thicknesses extended from its body, probing into the sand. As I stared, it grew taller, with new grayish-white growths continuously welling up from within, layering and wrapping upward. I grabbed my rifle and fired. 3 rounds in a burst, all hits, right in the center. The sound of the bullets hitting was wrong. They landed with a dull thud, like punching into wet cement. Then the impact points instantly turned white, just like that, like a magic trick, grayish-white fading to dead white, with a shiny layer forming on the surface. The thing contracted sharply, squeezing the 3 bullets out of its body. They fell to the ground, flattened into lead discs, still steaming. Before I could shout, Miller had already opened fire, full auto. The bullet struck the thing's side, and every impact point turned white, contracted, then spat the rounds out. The gunfire was deafening in the desert, but aside from that, I couldn't hear any sound from the thing. It didn't even have a mouth to make noise. When hit, it just contracted sharply, then kept churning out more flesh. Just then, the machine gunner next to me, Holt, set up his squad automatic weapon. The roar of its fire numbed my ears. A whole belt of ammo swept across the thing's base. The bullets sank in, but it didn't tear open. They seemed swallowed, embedded in its flesh, and then that patch of tissue started shedding dry shells, like molting. Holt kept firing and shouting, but I couldn't make out his words anymore. His barrel was smoking, and the thing kept moving forward. Its tube feet dug into the sand, pulled out, and dug in again, pushing its entire body forward. It slid like a bulldozer, silent and steady, crushing everything in its path. Then it extended a tentacle. The tentacle grew from its left side, about as thick as an arm, segmented, with rings of cartilage wrapped around each section. It extended slowly but with deadly precision, heading straight for Miller. Miller ran back, but as he turned, the tentacle had already coiled around his left forearm. I clearly saw each sucker on the tentacle open its mouth, biting into the sleeve of his combat uniform. Then the tentacle started twisting. I heard a series of sounds. Crackling, crackling, like wringing out a wet towel, but duller. Miller's left arm instantly went limp, dangling, the bones inside clearly shattered. He didn't make a sound, just stared at his deformed arm. It now hung against his body, swaying at an impossible angle. The combat uniform sleeve was still intact, but everything inside was destroyed, with a deep purple bruise spreading under the skin. I swapped magazines and fired 3 more rounds at the tentacle. The bullets did the same thing, penetrated, then were spat out. But the tentacle released Miller and retracted, dragging his arm across the ground. Miller was pulled down, crashing onto the sand. He landed hard, crushing his ruined arm beneath him, and only then let out a scream, high-pitched and sharp. Just then, Sergeant Royce's voice exploded from behind us. He stood beside the armored vehicle, firing his gun in our direction while shouting, "Light! Use light!" We all heard him, but none of us understood what he meant. Royce yelled again, saying the thing was afraid of light, that it couldn't last long in dry conditions. In this desperate situation, we had no choice but to cling to this lifeline. Holt yanked the machine gun back and began retreating. I pulled Miller up from the ground and dragged him toward the armored vehicle. Miller's left foot could still kick a few times, but his whole body had gone limp, and he kept muttering nonsense, his daughter's name. By the time we reached the vehicle, the thing suddenly stopped. It didn't chase us anymore. It just stood where we had been, all its tube feet retracting beneath its body, the surface membranes rapidly drying and hardening. I circled around the back of the vehicle and saw its color visibly fading, eventually turning into a deathly white like plaster. In less than half a minute, it stopped moving, transformed into a sculpture standing about 30 meters in front of us. Everything suddenly went eerily quiet. Only Miller's ragged breathing and the sound of Holt's gun barrel dragging through the sand remained. The sergeant stared at the sculpture, his gun still aimed at it. After a long while, he lowered his voice and said, "See? Light. It's afraid of light." Someone asked for a situation report over the radio. Royce replied, saying the threat was temporarily neutralized, that the thing would dehydrate and stiffen in dry conditions. He sounded absolutely certain, as if he had it all figured out. I didn't believe a word of it, but at that moment, there was no other way out. Miller's arm was beyond saving. When the medic cut open his sleeve, I saw the arm. The skin was intact, but the bones inside were completely shattered, the whole limb limp like a water-filled balloon. The medic applied a tourniquet and gave Miller anesthesia, but Miller was still trembling, his eyes fixed on the plaster statue. The sergeant ordered all vehicles to turn on their searchlights at full power, aimed directly at the sculpture. The light shone on it, glaring white, revealing nothing unusual. We huddled together in the light, clutching our guns and waiting. Time began to slow down. The hum of the searchlight ballast droned on and on. After a while, my throat felt dry, but when I swallowed, the saliva felt thick, as if the air itself had turned sticky. I glanced at the others. Several were constantly swallowing. Lewis sat in the driver's seat, his window rolled down, pouring water from his canteen into his mouth, but the flow seemed slower as it poured out. The sculpture stood there, motionless. The light shone on it, and it showed no reaction. But everyone felt as if something inside that sculpture was watching us. 10,000 eyes, a million eyes, hidden behind the dry cracks and pores. The sergeant repeated over the radio. "Hold your positions. 40 minutes until the next fire support window." Miller was carried into the vehicle. I sat on the ground leaning against the tire, my gun resting across my legs, my eyes fixed on that pile of plaster. The longer I stared, the more I felt its outline was changing. Every time I blinked, its shape seemed to shift. I knew it was alive. It was waiting. We held our position in front of that plaster heap for about 20 minutes. Maybe longer. I couldn't tell. Sergeant Royce kept insisting over the radio to command that. "The situation is stable. Strong light suppression is effective." Command didn't seem to believe him, asking several times. Royce finally grew impatient and said, "If you don't believe me, come down and see for yourselves." Listening beside him, all I could think about was how the thing had spat out the bullets earlier. The searchlights remained on, all 4 vehicles' lights aimed at the sculpture, the glare blindingly white. The hum of the light ballast droned on, and after a while, my teeth began to ache. Holt crouched beside the machine gun, the barrel still pointed at the thing, but his finger wasn't on the trigger, it rested outside the guard. His lips were cracked from dryness, though he didn't seem to notice, constantly licking them, only making them worse. For a few minutes, it really did seem safe. Lewis leaned out of the driver's cabin, lit a cigarette, took a few puffs, and cursed. "This damn place." The medic bandaged Miller inside the vehicle. Miller had stopped screaming, probably because the anesthesia had kicked in. I leaned against the front wheel, took out my canteen, and drank. The water entered my mouth, and I held it for a moment before swallowing. It tasted slightly gritty, as if mixed with fine dust, leaving my throat sticky. I held the canteen up to the light. The water was clear, nothing in it. Then I noticed the sand. The sand at my feet was seeping water. It oozed up between the grains, bit by bit, pooling into a thin film. I wiped it with my finger. The water felt slippery, and rubbing my fingers together left a sticky residue. Bringing it closer to smell, there was a faint alkaline scent, like freshly opened cement rinsed with water. I looked around, under the vehicle, beside the tires, across the sand. Damp patches were spreading everywhere, creeping outward in blotches. The platoon leader's boots began to slip beneath him. He glanced down at the ground, scuffing his soles a couple of times, scraping up a layer of grayish foam. He looked up at me. I looked back at him. Neither of us spoke. The air had changed too. Earlier it was dry and hot, scraping painfully as it entered the nostrils. Now it was no longer dry but stifling, each breath feeling hot as it slid down the throat, settling heavily in the lungs. I unbuttoned my collar, but it didn't help. The stifling feeling remained. Nearby, a new recruit named Sally started hiccuping, several in a row. He pressed a hand to his chest, complaining of stomach discomfort. The sculpture hadn't moved, but its color had changed. Earlier it was a dry white, like plaster powder. Now, under the lights, its surface seemed to glisten. I stood up and took a couple of steps forward. The platoon leader called out to me, but I cut him off, saying I'd just take a look. I stopped about 15 meters away, focusing on the lowest section. It was seeping fluid. From the cracks in its dried, fissured surface, a transparent, sticky liquid was slowly oozing out, trickling down onto the sand. The damp patches spreading across the surrounding sand radiated outward from its base, creeping toward us in concentric rings. That's when I noticed the smell. I hadn't caught it before, maybe because of the wind. Now, with no breeze, the odor hung heavy in the air, right under our noses, a mix of ammonia and metal powder, sharp and choking, leaving a bitter taste at the back of the tongue when inhaled. Holt smelled it too, cursing as he pulled up his collar to cover his nose, but the smell had already clung to our clothes. I retreated to the vehicle and told the platoon leader the thing was leaking. He said he'd seen it. He asked me how to report it to command over the radio. I said I didn't know. He said he didn't either. Just then, Solly hiccuped again, then crouched down, saying his soles were stuck. He lifted his foot, and I saw silvery white strands stretching between his boot and the sand, like stretched chewing gum, growing longer and thinner until they snapped, springing back to the ground and glistening on the sand. Solly looked at his sole, then at me, his expression grim. He muttered to himself that something in his stomach kept rising. I looked down at my own feet. My boots were stuck too. Lifting my foot felt wrong, heavier, with strands stretching beneath. The substance seeping from the sculpture had already spread across the sand under our feet, a thin layer mixed with the grains, growing thicker by the moment. The platoon leader radioed in another. "All clear," his tone steadier than before. After hanging up, he told me to hold on a little longer. Command said the firing window was less than 30 minutes away, with the third barrage coming soon. As he spoke, his eyes remained fixed on the sculpture, never glancing at me. Holt suddenly whispered, "It's watching us." I said it had no eyes. Holt said he knew, but he still felt it was watching us. The lights were still shining, the ballast still humming. The sculpture stood in the light, seeping fluid, waiting. The voice from command over the radio remained calm, like a weather report. "Third barrage, 1 round loaded, target coordinates confirmed. All units confirm target area clear." Platoon leader Royce radioed back. "Target area not clear. Repeat, personnel in target area. Delay firing." The other end paused for about 3 seconds before replying. "Orders confirmed. Barrage proceeds as scheduled. Your position is outside the safe distance." Royce cursed, slamming the radio against the vehicle. He shouted to us, "Everyone take cover! They're firing!" I dove behind a wheel, Holt dropping beside me. Lewis flipped straight from the driver's seat under the vehicle. Solly crouched at the rear with his rifle, and the medic pressed Miller down inside the compartment. We all huddled behind the vehicle, staring at the plaster sculpture 30 meters away, still seeping fluid. When the shell came, there was no sound. The electromagnetic railgun's projectile traveled far faster than sound. First, I saw a blinding white flash erupt over the dune, as if someone had ignited a sun up there. Then the shockwave caught up, a transparent spherical blast expanding outward from the impact point. Sand pushed into a wall several meters high, crashing in all directions. My chest took a hit, a dull thud like being struck with a thick quilt. My ears went completely deaf, filled only with a ringing buzz. After the shockwave passed, I lifted my head. The sculpture wasn't shattered. Dust and smoke enveloped it, sand still cascading down. But I could see its outlines still in place, and it was moving. As the dust cleared slightly, I saw that the area around the impact point was covered in cracks. The plaster surface had split open, the shell pushed outward from within, and something new was growing beneath. Layer upon layer of hexagonal plates, each as large as a palm, gray-white with a metallic sheen, like insect shells but thicker. Coarse fibrous bundles connected the plates, and the entire structure bulged outward, still dripping with the same viscous fluid that had seeped out earlier. It had actually withstood a direct hit from a rail gun. The plates at the impact site were glowing white, heated to a blinding intensity, the air around them distorted by the heat. But they hadn't broken. Beneath those plates, new tissue continued to emerge, layer upon layer, like dough overflowing from a bowl. It expanded frantically within seconds, its size instantly surpassing the entire armored vehicle. By then, my hearing had partially returned. The first thing I heard was Holt shouting, "It's not dead! It's not dead!" Then the thing moved. All the tube feet beneath it extended, densely packed together, each as thick as a wrist with suction cups at the base. The tube feet alternated, stretching forward, gripping the sand, and dragging the massive body toward us at a speed too fast to follow. It moved faster than my 100-meter sprint. It slid across the sand, leaving a wet trail behind. The platoon leader yelled to open fire. Holt grabbed the machine gun and unleashed an entire belt of ammunition, sweeping it across the scaly armor. The moment the bullet struck, the surface of the plates instantly turned white and hardened. Asterisk clink, clink, clink asterisk, like hammering steel, sparks flying everywhere. The bullets all ricocheted, not leaving a single dent. Holt emptied the belt, the gun barrel smoking. He cursed while reloading, his lips trembling violently. Solly shouldered the anti-material sniper rifle, resting the barrel on the hood. The recoil was strong enough to dislocate a shoulder. He fired once, and before the gunshot faded, I saw the creature's momentum falter. A .50 caliber bullet had struck it squarely in the front. The plates at the impact site still turned white and hardened. This time, they left a mark, a white spot the size of a fingernail, surrounded by fine cracks. Then the white spot began to recede, the cracks filled by a transparent fluid seeping from beneath. In less than 2 seconds, it was repaired. Solly froze, pulled the bolt, and fired again. Another white spot, another repair. Before he could chamber a third round, Lewis crawled out from under the vehicle and dragged him back. I turned to look at the platoon leader. He was staring back at me, his lips moving but no words coming out. The expression on his face was one I'd never forget. A platoon leader with 17 years of service, at a loss for what to command. The colossal creature rumbled closer, the gleaming hard plates on its body emitting a grating, teeth-chattering sound as it crawled. Yet the base of its tube feet, pressed against the sand, lacked armor, exposed gray-red flesh pulsating like a heart. Then the radio crackled again. Command Center. Impact Observation Team, report damage assessment. No one answered. The creature slammed into the nearest vehicle, Vehicle 2, unmanned but weighing 8 tons. Upon impact, the entire vehicle shifted sideways by half a meter, its frame groaning with a sound that set teeth on edge. Then its tube feet flipped upward along both sides of the vehicle, one by one, gripping the roof. The metal roof began to cave in, starting as a small dent before the entire top crumpled like a stepped-on soda can, crunching inward. The windows shattered, and the vehicle was crushed into a heap of scrap metal. I was stunned. Holt stopped cursing. Solly crouched on the ground, clutching his sniper rifle, the barrel pointed downward. Lewis stood behind me, and I heard a sound from his mouth. Asterisk clack, clack, clack asterisk, like teeth chattering. Then the creature retreated from the wreckage of Vehicle 2, pieces of the chassis still tangled around its tube feet, dragging across the sand with a screeching sound. It turned toward our vehicle, its tube feet reorienting, and began to accelerate. The platoon leader roared, "Get in! Retreat!" Lewis reacted first, scrambling toward the driver's seat, his knees banging against the step as he tumbled inside. Holt flung the machine gun into the vehicle, and I shoved Solly in after him. The medic had already secured Miller and was crouching at the rear, reaching out to me. I ran. The viscous fluid seeping across the ground had turned the sand into a slurry, each step sinking deep, my shoes pulling up with sand and silvery threads stuck to the soles. The creature's blood was everywhere, the air thick with the smell of ammonia and metallic dust, so pungent it stung the eyes. I ran to the rear of the vehicle, and the medic grabbed my wrist, pulling me up. The door wasn't closed yet, and I looked back. It was 30 meters away, still swelling. The scales covering its body weren't just protecting its front anymore. They were spreading to the sides, like a pair of half-formed wings unfolding. New things were emerging from beneath the sand, calcified spikes, one after another, grayish-white, slanting upward from the ground around it, like giant bamboo shoots pushing through the soil. More and more spikes sprouted, forming a circle that completely sealed off the area we had been holding. The platoon leader slapped the roof from the passenger seat. "Go, go, go!" Lewis stomped on the gas. The engine roared, the wheels spun, skidding on the slime before finally gripping the sand and surging forward. I sat in the truck bed, gripping the side of the vehicle, watching the thing shrink into the distance. It didn't chase us, stopping beside the wreckage of Vehicle 2, its tube feet stuffing pieces of twisted metal beneath its body. A vertical crack split its surface, running from the top to the base, dark and steaming. Then the crack bulged. I heard a dull thud, like something massive underground belching. Immediately, all the spikes around it began vibrating, buzzing at a frequency so fast it blurred into a continuous hum. My feet went numb again. That heartbeat from underground was back. The truck bed kept jolting violently. Lewis had the gas pedal floored, the engine screaming as if about to explode. Clutching the side, I saw the trail of wet sand kicked up by our tires behind us, grayish-white, mixed with those silvery threads. Holt sat across from me, his gun still cradled in his arms, but his hands were trembling, all 10 fingers shaking. He looked at me, his lips trembling uselessly for a long moment before squeezing out a hoarse sentence. "Can't be killed." I didn't reply. I glanced back at the platoon leader. Roy sat in the passenger seat, one hand gripping the handle, the other still clutching the radio. The comms kept demanding damage assessments and target confirmations, hysterically questioning why we had lost contact. The platoon leader raised the radio to his mouth, clenched it for a moment, then lowered it again. Solly huddled in the deepest part of the truck bed, his sniper rifle laid across his knees. He was speaking, his voice very soft. At first, I thought he was reporting to someone, but then I made it out. He was reciting prayers, repeating the same passage over and over in his hometown's dialect, which I couldn't understand. His fingers kept stroking the barrel, leaving sweaty prints all over it. The medic crouched beside Miller. Miller wasn't speaking now, his eyes closed, his face completely drained of color. His left arm was immobilized in a splint by the medic, but the limb was grotesquely swollen, bursting through the fabric, the skin a horrifying blackish purple. Then Lewis started howling. His first cry from the driver's seat made me think the engine had failed. But then I understood. He was screaming, "I want to go home." Over and over, each cry drawn out, his voice cracking until it dissolved into sobs. He howled while wrenching the steering wheel, swerving the vehicle sharply left. I slammed into the side of the truck bed, and Holt nearly tumbled out. The platoon leader reached for the steering wheel, yelling at Lewis, "What are you doing? Steady!" Lewis seemed not to hear. He shoved the platoon leader's hand away and stomped harder on the gas. The vehicle was now so fast it felt unstable, the 4 wheels losing traction on the sand, fishtailing side to side. The medic shouted, "I can't hold Miller down." I turned to see Miller sliding on the stretcher, the medic bracing his waist with a knee and gripping the stretcher straps with both hands. The platoon leader grabbed for the wheel again, and this time Lewis punched him. Lewis swung his fist while howling, snot and tears smearing his face. "Didn't you see? None of you saw? It crushed Vehicle 2. Crushed it." As soon as he finished speaking, the sand less than 20 meters ahead of us exploded. Something thrust up from underground, grayish-white, thicker than a utility pole, pointed at the top like a giant fawn. The sound of it piercing the sand was muffled, a thud, then the sand parted, and the spike, trailing fine sand and slime, stabbed straight into the ground directly in front of our vehicle. Lewis wrenched the steering wheel hard, swerving the vehicle to avoid it. The whole truck slid sideways, tilting so far that one side's wheels lifted off the ground. I was thrown sideways, my back slamming against the truck bed's edge, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Holt tumbled from his seat, his machine gun slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the metal floor. The vehicle didn't flip. Lewis corrected the steering, and all four wheels touched down again, but he didn't slow down. He stomped on the gas once more, veering sharply to the right, heading straight toward Vehicle 2's location. The platoon leader yelled at him to turn around, but Lewis ignored him. He let out another howl, louder than before, as if someone had stabbed him. I climbed up from the truck bed and peered into the cab. Lewis's eyes were bulging as if they might pop out of his skull. Both hands were clamped white-knuckled around the steering wheel, his foot jammed on the accelerator, his whole body rigid as a steel rod. He kept muttering, "Go, go, go, go." The vehicle shot forward about 200 meters. Then the second spike came. This time, it came from directly beneath the truck. First, I heard a deafening roar of metal being pierced. The whole vehicle lurched upward, then stopped dead. The spike from below had thrust straight up through the chassis, punched through the floor of the cabin, and emerged as a pale gray tip through the roof of the turret. The entire truck was skewered on it, all four wheels still spinning in the air, but the body was stuck, unable to come down. The engine was still roaring. Tires clawed at the sand, throwing grit against the hull with a hissing rattle. Then new sounds began rising from underneath, creaking, groaning noises, as more tube feet crawled up the vehicle's shell. I leaned over the side of the truck bed and looked down. Several tube feet had emerged from the sand, clinging to the hull as they climbed upward. Some were already on the roof, their suckers gripping the metal, sucking with desperate force. The roof began to buckle inward. Right above my head, the metal first bulged upward, then pressed down. As it sank, it started to crumple, wrinkles spreading outward like ripples. The groaning grew louder. The whole vehicle screamed, a sound like a bull being crushed alive. Holt hugged his gun and shrank into a corner, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Solly stopped chanting. He stood up, banged his head against the deforming roof, and crouched back down. The platoon leader kicked the door open, trying to jump out. As soon as the door cracked, a tube foot squeezed through the gap. Its sucker spread open and slapped against his body armor with a wet smack. The platoon leader grabbed at it, but it wouldn't budge. The smaller suckers had bitten deep into the fibers of his vest. The medic rushed to help. Together they pulled, and when it finally came loose, it left a palm-sized hole in the vest, the fibers torn clean away. Lewis was still stomping on the gas. The engine revved into the red line, the whole truck trembling on the spike, a continuous shriek of metal. The platoon leader reached over and twisted the key. The engine died, and sudden silence fell inside. Only the sound of metal being slowly crushed remained, along with Lewis's sobbing. Lewis slumped in his seat, drool dripping from his mouth. His hand still gripped the wheel, but his whole body was convulsing. He had lost control of his bladder, trembling violently like a leaf in a storm. Holt suddenly stood up, raised his machine gun, and emptied a full burst into the roof. Bullets punched through the metal, leaving a dozen small holes. Light streamed through, casting stark white stripes across Holt's face. He fired until the belt ran dry, the bolt locked back, but he kept squeezing the trigger. Click, click, click. The medic wrapped his arms around him from behind, wrenching the gun from his hands. Holt collapsed to the floor, buried his face in his knees, and went still. Solly began slamming the butt of his rifle against the side of the truck. Thud. 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 Each blow left a dent. After about 10 strikes, the stock split. He stopped, stared at the broken wood, then threw it aside. I sat on the floor of the truck bed, my back against the side panel. The roof kept sinking lower, now low enough that I could touch it if I stood. Through the bullet holes, I looked outside and saw that expanse of pale gray scales slowly shifting closer. The thing was going to envelop the entire vehicle, wrap it bit by bit, and crush it into a metal pancake. That's when I saw the tube feet. The ones clinging to the hull, each as thick as my thigh, with hard, pale gray shells that gleamed like metal. But my eyes traveled down to where they emerged from the sand, at their roots, and there was no armor there. The tissue was exposed, damp and grayish red, pulsing, swelling and contracting like a waterlogged sponge. With each pulse, the tube feet dug deeper into the vehicle. I stared at that spot for a long moment. The roof inched downward, and I felt the cold touch of metal above my head. Only one image burned in my mind. Its body was covered in armor, but the flesh at the very base was soft. It was all plates and scales, except for that ring of exposed, pulsing gray-red flesh beneath the tube feet. That flesh was throbbing. That was where it dragged itself forward. That was its only weak spot. I reached out and felt around on the floor. My hand found the entrenching tool, the one usually hung on the back of the truck, with a folding handle and a steel blade, serrated along the edge. I picked it up, unfolded the handle, and tightened the lock. The platoon leader saw me with the shovel and asked what I was doing. I didn't answer. I took my rifle off and set it on the ground. Holt looked up at me. I stripped off my body armor. The medic asked if I'd lost my mind. Sally stared at the shovel in my hand. My eyes were fixed on that exposed, pulsing, slick flesh outside the vehicle. Only one thought filled my head: pry it open from the inside. I stood up, the roof of the vehicle already pressing down on my shoulders. I climbed over the side of the truck bed, my feet landing on the vehicle's shell. The metal beneath my feet was scorching hot, the heat from repeated crushing and deformation still lingering. I stepped onto the hood of the truck, facing the nearest tube foot at its root, that patch of grayish-red tissue devoid of scales. The thing sensed me. Several tube feet peeled away from the roof, reaching toward me. One coiled around my left leg, its suckers biting into my pant leg, and my calf instantly went numb, as if pierced by hundreds of needles at once. A second one wrapped around my right leg, its suckers clamping onto my ankle through my boot. They began to retract, dragging me down from the pinned vehicle. I was pulled under the truck, dragged into the center of that wet, soft, pulsating grayish-red tissue. Beneath it was a heat like stepping into a rain-soaked mud pit on a summer day as a child, the mud warm, carrying the stifling heat from deep underground. The entrenching tool was still in my hand. I raised the shovel, aimed at the gap between the pulsating soft flesh and my leg, and drove it in with all my strength, then pried. The sensation of the shovel piercing through was like stabbing into a stack of waterlogged cardboard, dull, muffled, with a slight elasticity. The blade sliced deep into the soft tissue, and a high-pressure, grayish-white bodily fluid instantly gushed out. Both my legs were trapped in its tissue, my knees and below locked in place by the tube feet's suckers, unable to pull free. But the shovel was already in. I gripped the handle with both hands, pressing my entire weight down. The blade sank another inch deeper. That's when it reacted. The surrounding soft tissue began to squeeze against me. I watched as the edges of the incision instantly swelled with grayish-white proliferating tissue, densely churning, trying to fill the gap I had pried open. At the same time, the suction force of the tube feet intensified sharply. My shin bones creaked under the pressure, feeling as if clamped in a vise. I dug my heels hard into the root of one tube foot, forcing myself to push back 2 inches, then turned the shovel handle sideways, using the full weight of my upper body to pry. A sharp crack. I tore open the entire layer of soft tissue along with the underlying fascia. Then the high-pressure fluid erupted. The liquid shot out from the fissure with a whistling sound, sharp, like steam escaping from a pressure cooker. Grayish-white and thick, it splattered onto the sand, instantly scorching it with a plume of white smoke. A splash hit my left calf, and an intense numbness instantly transformed into searing pain, as if someone had pressed a red-hot branding iron against my calf. The high-temperature fluid burned through my combat pants in an instant, and a horrifying wave of pain and the smell of charred fabric washed over my left leg. I gritted my teeth and didn't let go. The shovel plunged another half-inch deeper. The fissure widened further. It began to convulse. All the tube feet spasmed simultaneously, and the two coiled around me suddenly loosened. I sank deeper. The soft tissue beneath its body was now fully exposed before me, bodily fluid still spraying out, the pressure tearing the fissure wider. I heard a deafening roar erupt from within its body, muffled, like an underground pipe bursting. Then all its tube feet began to thrash wildly. One struck my shoulder, sending me flying backward, my back slamming into the sandy ground. I pushed myself up from the ground. My mouth was full of sand. The entrenching tool was still in my hand. The thing had no time for me now. The scales covering its body were cracking apart, one by one. From head to toe, they snapped and popped. With each break, 2 or 3 nearby plates lifted, their edges curling upward, exposing the grayish-white fragile tissue beneath, which immediately began to blacken, dry, and smoke upon contact with the air. It let out a shriek. It had no mouth, but the sound emanated from its entire body, high-pitched, piercing, like glass scraping against steel, sharp and harsh, exploding directly behind my temples. My ears rang, and then I could hear nothing but that sound. The platoon leader was shouting something behind me. I saw his mouth moving, but no sound reached me. Holt had both hands clamped over his ears, his gun discarded on the ground. Solly knelt beside the vehicle, mouth agape. The sound lasted about 5 seconds. Then the flow of bodily fluid from the fissure suddenly doubled, like a faucet turned wide open. As the fluid continued to spill out, the surrounding sand turned into a pungent, muddy mess. Then the cracked plates began to fall. The first one hit the sand with a thud, a palm-sized hexagonal plate, its edges still trailing torn fibers. Immediately after, the plates peeled away like tiles ripped off by a gale, clattering down in waves. It began to collapse. It started collapsing from the top. The largest armor plate at its highest point sank inward. The supporting structures beneath could no longer hold. The entire scale, along with the flesh underneath, caved in. Then the collapse spread downward, from top to bottom, section by section, shrinking inward. More bodily fluid oozed out, the color of the fluid shifting from grayish-white to grayish-yellow, growing thinner and thinner. The alkaline smell in the air was so strong it stung the eyes. Even covering my nose with my sleeve was useless. The odor seeped right through the skin. I stood up. The pain in my leg nearly sent me back to my knees. The skin on my left calf was completely burned, my pants fused to the wound. Every movement felt like tearing skin. I didn't care. Leaning on the shovel, I moved forward step by step. Sala was shouting something. I couldn't hear him, but from the shape of his mouth, he was calling my name. Holt had gotten up from the ground. He looked at the collapsing mass, then at me, his eyes as if staring at two monsters. Platoon leader Royce ran forward a few steps with his rifle, aiming at the remains of the thing before lowering it. The medic leaned halfway out of the truck bed, holding a first aid kit, mouth agape. I stopped about 5 meters from the pile of wreckage. It was still shrinking. Not completely dead yet. In the center of the wreckage, a pulsating bulge throbbed, expanding, then contracting, each pulse slower than the last. Scattered armor plates around it were soaked in the remaining fluid inside, their metallic sheen fading, turning ashen, then brittle, cracking into smaller fragments. The pulsating bulge twitched once more. Then, in a violent convulsion, it burst completely. A pool of transparent fluid gushed out, mixed with white particles, spreading across the sand before quickly seeping away. It stopped moving. The sand was a mess. Wreckage was scattered everywhere. Armor fragments, clumps of fascia, bone shards, and the grayish-white fluid that had cooled into a thin film, all mixed with the sand, pale and stark. The shape it finally settled into resembled a burned-down wax museum. Everything collapsed, everything in a half-melted state. Silence. My ears were still ringing, but I could hear a little now. First, Lewis's sobbing. He was still in the driver's seat, face buried in the steering wheel, shoulders shaking. Then the desert wind finally blew again. Hot wind carrying sand, sweeping over the wreckage, rustling the fragmented films. The platoon leader walked over and stood beside me. He looked down at my left calf, bit his lip, and turned to call for the medic. The medic ran over with his kit, crouched down to examine my leg. His hands trembled as he cut open my pants. I glanced down. The skin on the outer side of my left calf was completely burned, the training pants fused to the charred wound. The medic took water from his kit to rinse my leg. When the water hit, the pain nearly made me grit my teeth to dust. I looked down at the shovel in my hand. A small piece of grayish-white fascia still clung to the blade, sticky, dripping with fluid. Then the radio crackled. It lay in the sand by my feet, half soaked in the residual fluid. Probably dropped when the platoon leader fell earlier. It was still working, and the voice from the command center came through. Observation team, confirm impact status. Repeat, confirm impact status. The platoon leader bent down, picked up the radio, wiped the mud off on his clothes, pressed the talk button, opened his mouth, then released it. He stared at the wreckage for a long time. Then he handed the radio to me. I took it, pressed the button, and said, "Target destroyed." There was a 2-second pause on the other end. Command center. Acknowledged. Return to the rally point for extraction. I didn't reply. I placed the radio on the ground, leaned on the shovel, and turned to look at the very center of the wreckage, where the bulge had burst. A pool of transparent fluid was being absorbed by the sand, scattered with a few rice-sized white fragments. I crouched down and nudged them with the tip of the shovel. The fragments were soft, encased in a membrane. When held up to the light, a small black dot was visible inside each. I didn't say a word. I flipped the shovel over, scooped up the fragments with the back of the blade, and placed them on my glove. The medic pushed me down. "Don't move. Your leg injury has reached the dermis." He applied a gel to my leg, cool, but the moment it touched the wound, the pain made me break out in sweat. I clenched my glove, holding the fragments in my palm. Just then, Salah came over. He helped Holt along too. Holt had 2 dried tracks on his face, which he hadn't wiped away. He sat on the sand beside me, clutching his rifle, looking at me, then at the wreckage, then back at me. He opened his mouth, his voice too hoarse to form words, finally squeezing out just 2. "Dead?" I nodded. Salah stood by the wreckage, nudging a piece of broken armor with the tip of his boot. The fragment flipped over in the sand, already brittle as chalk, shattering into several pieces with the kick. He crouched down, picked up a larger piece, turned it over in his hands, and said, "What the hell is this thing?" The platoon leader replied, "No idea." He paused. "Not sure what the recovery team will say when they get here." Holt suddenly laughed, the kind of uncontrollable laughter that comes from being scared out of your wits, a grating sound almost like crying. He laughed and said, "Target destroyed. Target destroyed. That's how you fucking reported it." I laughed too. The moment my lips curled, pain shot up my leg, turning the laugh into a gritted teeth grimace. The medic finished bandaging me and went over to check on Miller. Miller was still alive, the swelling in his arm had gone down a little, but the medic said he might lose that hand. Lewis finally climbed down from the driver's seat. His legs were weak, and he collapsed onto the step as soon as he touched the ground, burying his face in his hands. No one yelled at him. I stood up and tested my leg. My left foot could bear weight, but I couldn't walk far. Using the entrenching tool as a crutch, I took a couple of steps, then glanced back. The wreckage was starting to bubble under the sun. The remaining fluids, heated by the sun, were liquefying again, emitting fine, dense bubbles. The entire wreckage area looked like a pot of frothing batter. The wet patches on the sand began to recede toward the center, shrinking inward from all sides, condensing the wreckage into a single mass. The alkaline smell in the air faded slightly, replaced by the scent of rust. Then I noticed something. The faint heartbeat I could vaguely sense beneath the sand was gone. Completely gone. I took a deep breath. Sand and the alkaline smell mixed together, scraping down my throat. I coughed twice and spat on the ground. The phlegm was grayish-white. I stared at the phlegm for 2 seconds. The medic called from behind, telling me to get in the vehicle. I tightened my gloves, clutching the few white fragments in my palm, and hobbled toward the vehicle with the shovel as a crutch. Behind me, the wreckage continued to bubble. Under the sun, everything was quiet except for the faint sound of bubbles popping and the wind rolling fragments across the sand. The evacuation came quickly. 2 transport planes from the biochemical disposal unit landed directly on the sand. As the doors opened, everyone who stepped out was clad in hazmat suits, their masks sealed tightly. 2 people in hazmat suits lifted me onto a stretcher. They took my entrenching tool and sealed it in a yellow bag. I wanted to say there was something on the shovel, but my throat was too dry to make a sound. Inside the transport plane, the air reeked of disinfectant. The medic crouched beside me, wearing gloves as he cut open the temporary bandage on my left leg and began treating it again. His movements were unusually gentle, too gentle for an experienced medic who'd seen countless injuries. I tilted my head to look at my calf. The epidermis was completely gone, exposing the dark brown, dried-out dermis, like a piece of pork skin left to air dry for 2 days. Blisters had formed along the edges, some already burst, oozing a pale yellow fluid mixed with the white ointment the medic applied. He used tweezers to pluck something from the edge of the wound. Something tiny, the size of a grain of rice. White, glinting at the tip of the tweezers. The medic held it up to the light, examining it for several seconds, then placed it into a small transparent vial and sealed the lid. He turned and whispered to the nurse beside him. "Sir, look. This has an oval pore. It's an embryo." The nurse said nothing. The medic used the tweezers to probe my wound again, extracting 2 more, and placed them into the same vial. He held the vial up to the light and shook it gently. 3 white specks slowly sank through the transparent liquid. My head buzzed. I turned to the other side and saw the 4 bag hanging from the stand. The fluid inside was clear, glowing white under the cabin lights, swaying gently in the plastic bag. I stared at the bag for a long time. With each sway of the liquid, the contents inside turned over. Tiny white particles were flowing down the tube, 1, 2, 3, mixing silently into the clear fluid, quietly entering the vein on the back of my hand. The cabin lights snapped off. Only the roar of the engines and the darkness remained.